So I'd like to convene the public information meeting about the Cascade Transmission Project pre-application. My name is Stuart Henderson. I'm the Clean Energy Program Manager with the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council here in Washington, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a presentation. We're going to do some introductions of our folks and the folks from the project team. And then we'll do, I'll have a presentation about the FSEC process, and then we will get a presentation about the project, the Cascade Renewable Transmission Project. Well, we should have some time for questions. So think of questions. We haven't had a lot of questions the last couple of nights. So questions are very welcome, both for the folks in the room. We also have folks, this meeting is also taking place online. So there's folks online who are going to be participating in this and may be asking questions as well. To be clear, though, this is not a hearing. So we are not here we are not here to gather input from folks. I will describe. There's a way to give input, but we aren't really set up to receive input here. So you know, we really want to confine the comments to not comments, but just questions about either about the FSEC process or the project. I've been saying, you know, you can cast a ballot the day after the election. You can say you did it, but it's not gonna change the outcome. And that's the same thing here. You know, there's a place for comments, but this is not it. Yeah, and again, you know, to put this all in context, you know, we are talking about FSEC's role in the approval of this project, but this is a very complex project. So part of the project it comes on land and right around here, right in Stevenson, and so FSEC will have the sole review of that project. Parts of the project are on land over in Oregon. The beginning and the end are in Oregon. So our counterparts in the Oregon Energy Facility Site Council will be in charge of the review over there. We've had them online the last couple of nights. I think they'll be here tonight. So they are also, if they make it, will be available for questions as well. And we've been coordinating closely with them. So we're strictly in charge of the stuff on our side of the river. They're strictly in charge of the stuff on their side of the river. There's also a river, you know, and early on we tried to say, well, we'll be in charge of the Washington salmon, you be in charge of the Oregon salmon, but we just couldn't tell them apart. We were stumped. So we said, well, why don't we get our Fish and Wildlife folks together and come up with one study that everyone agrees is the right study, and only do one study that to look at all of our salmon in our river. So that's the plan. We've been coordinating quite extensively, and there's also a number of other federal agencies, and because it's a navigable river, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be heavily involved in permitting as well. So it's a very, very complex project. We only have strict authority over part of it, but we're doing our best to coordinate with everybody, and you know, so that we can the review can be done promptly. If there's problems, they get identified, they either get addressed or they don't. And if it's a good project, great, we pass it on. If it's not, we give that, you'll hear what we do. Yeah, and then before I actually give the presentation, I do want to make a land acknowledgement that we are physically, as I understand it, here in Stevenson on lands, traditional territories of the Cowlitz, Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla. And the employees of the state of Washington who are here in this room and also participating online are guided by the Centennial Accord and Chapter 43376 RCW, Revised Code of Washington, respecting and affirming tribal sovereignty and working with our tribal governments throughout the state in government-to-government partnership. So again, I'll reintroduce myself. We'll go into the introductions. Stu Henderson, Clean Energy Program Manager with Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, and the rest of our team.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Belkina, Energy Facility Site Specialist and contact person for this project.
I'm Joan Owens. I'm the leader of the admin team. To my right is Alex Shiley, and in the back is Andrea Grantham, our admins.
And we also have other folks who are listening in online and from the project folks. Oh, not live.
How's that?
There we go.
I'm Susan Brown, and I'm microphone challenged. I'm with PowerBridge. PowerBridge is the developer of the Cascade Renewable Transmission Project. I am a project coordinator. I'm here with a couple members of my team tonight. This is Ernie Griggs. He is our project manager. Out here we have John Ostrowski. He's the vice president of construction, And toward the back is Jeff Wood. He's our Chief Commercial Officer. We're not the whole team, but we're a part of the team, and we're really looking forward to introducing and discussing our proposed clean energy transmission project with you tonight.
Great. Thank you, Susan. So then with that, I'm going to go into the brief presentation under 15 minutes about the FSEC process, both what we're in now and what's to come, so everyone is up to date with that. So again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. Super grateful for everyone who made it. Yes, and this is a short presentation for folks who are unfamiliar with our agency. So background, a little bit of history of FSEC. FSEC was created in 1970 for the siting of thermal power plants. The intent was to create a one-stop permitting agency for large energy facilities. We're comprised of state and local government members who review each application before voting to make a council recommendation to the governor. If FSEC recommends approval, the package to the governor includes what we call a draft site certification agreement, or SCA, which defines all the pre-construction, construction, and operation plans, as well as all the way into the decommissioning stage. If approved by the governor's office, the decision preempts other state or local regulations. Membership. FSEC is comprised of members from several different state agencies. The chairperson is appointed by the governor, and there are standing members from 5 other agencies appointed by those agencies to sit on the council. Current council is made up of Chairwoman Kathleen Drew, Eli Levitt from the Department of Ecology, Mike Livingston from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Liz Osborne from the Department of Commerce, Lenny Young from the Department of Natural Resources, and Stacy Brewster from the Utilities and Transportation Commission. There are additional agencies that can elect to appoint a council member during the review of a new application. These agencies are Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, Department of Health, and the Military Department. And local counties can also appoint a council member for the review of a new application, and as well as if a proposal is located at a port, the port can appoint a non-voting member. Multiple energy facilities fall under FSEC's jurisdiction. Some of the projects are required to come through FSEC, such as thermal plants greater than 350 megawatts, nuclear generation for the purpose of generating electricity. Other projects can opt in to be covered by FSEC. They can either go through local permitting, or they can come through FSEC. That would include wind, solar, green hydrogen storage, or clean energy manufacturing. Transmission lines that are greater than 115 kilovolts can also opt in, and if they're greater than 500 kilovolts, they're required to come through FSEC. There's also some complicated thresholds for pipelines and refineries that you can find in the revised Code of Washington. So this is a map. I don't know how well you can see it here, but you can look at it more online, or we can look at it afterwards if you have any questions. But this shows all the facilities that are certificated or have applied for certification under FSEC's jurisdiction. So in green, there's 6 operating facilities, which include 2 natural gas facilities, a nuclear facility, 1 solar, and 2 wind facilities. There are blue marks there to indicate 4 additional facilities that are approved but have not yet been constructed. There's a clear circle for the 1 facility that's in the process of decommissioning. And then FSEC is currently reviewing 6 projects which are marked in yellow, including the Cascade Renewable transmission line, the long line on the border, the southern border there, which is the pre-application proposal, which brings us here this evening. So if you've been at all involved in another FSEC project, you've actually been involved in the application process. But for transmission lines have to go through an additional pre-application process, and we're now in that process right now. These are actually the stages of the pre-application process, and the ones with the check marks are the ones that are already done. So we had initial consultation meetings before any of this started quite some time ago. The developers prepared application materials. Those were submitted formally in late December. Notice was sent out to all the various stakeholders, including landowners and the cities along the way. Public notice went out for this meeting, and we're now in the second to last block there, doing this is now the third of 3 public meetings we've had in each of the 3 counties that that this project runs alongside of or runs through. There's also a negotiation process going on with local government regarding the right of the transmission corridor. now that these are completed, well, when this is completed tonight, and once that negotiation for the corridor is completed, then this project can go ahead and do the normal normal application process, or continue on to the normal application process, which I will go over right now. This is the most challenging part of the whole thing. It's the most detailed, but I've been asked to go through it very, very carefully. So this is a flow chart that shows the general process an applicant goes through when they submit an application to FSEC. There's green arrows that you'll see all over the chart. Those are places where there's formal public input is gathered. So you can see there's multiple processes that happen concurrently when FSEC is reviewing an application. There's the land use hearing and adjudicative process outlined on the far left. The State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA process, is down the middle. And then the third process on the right involves identifying and preparing applicable environmental permits. All the processes ultimately feed into the council's recommendation that gets made to the governor. So starting on the left there, where an adjudication is required following a land use consistency hearing, an order is issued to commence proceedings and initiate intervention. Members of the public who wish to participate in the adjudication have to identify themselves and their issues in writing. There are pre-hearing conferences, which the parties are granted intervention status and issues get identified. Exhibits and testimony are provided and cross-examinations conducted, after which the council looks at the information in the adjudication record and makes its deliberations. In the end, the council develops an order establishing their findings of fact and the conclusions of law based on the information that's come in through those proceedings. Then moving into the middle there, for every project proposed, a SEPA review is performed. Again, with this, looking at, applying the State Environmental Protection Act. When a determination of significance and a decision to prepare an environmental impact statement, or EIS, is made, public comments are taken on the scope of the EIS. After public comments for scoping, the SEPA responsible official determines the scope of the EIS. A draft environmental impact statement, EIS, is prepared and issued with a minimum of 30-day public comment period. And after that, there's a final EIS prepared and released. Under certain circumstances with some projects, there is not, it's determined there's non-significant impact, or there's a mitigated determination of non-significance, or MDNS, gets made. And an EIS is not required, but this project is definitely going to trigger an EIS, so we don't need to go into that. Following the conclusion of these separate avenues of application review, the council develops its recommendations to the governor, tying together the information brought forth through all aspects of the application review process. I mentioned that third process has to do with the permits. So FSEC, it becomes, again, part of that one-stop shop. FSEC is also the issuing agency for applicable environmental permits that the facility may require on the Washington side, including water quality and air quality permits as they may apply. The permits are identified in the final package with the council's recommendation to the governor. For the purpose of this proposal, FSEC is coordinating with other agencies of jurisdiction, such as the Army Corps of Engineers and Oregon state agencies, to ensure that all requirements will be met and appropriate permits issued by all the respective parties. So really trying to do a coordinated job. At the conclusion of the council's review of an application, a recommendation is made to the governor to either approve or reject the application. That starts a 60-day window within which the governor either can approve the application, reject it, or send it back to FSEC for mentioning specific issues for reconsideration. Any application that's rejected by the governor, that's the final decision for that application. If an application is approved by the governor, FSEC then has oversight of the environmental compliance for the entire life of the project, of the facility, all the way through decommissioning. So, if it comes, decades from now, when this cable has to be removed, that's all part of what FSEC is monitoring and making sure that it's done right. FSEC has standing contracts with applicable state agencies that assist in the monitoring and enforcement of conditions, either in the site certification agreement, identified permits, or the EIS. FSEC's enforcement authority extends to the issuance of any penalties as they may apply. So then, as I mentioned, FSEC oversees facilities under its jurisdiction through decommissioning. So before the start of construction of approved projects, there has to be an initial site restoration plan that's required. Then at the end of the life of the facility, but before decommissioning begins, there has to be a detailed site restoration plan supplied by the proponent, the developers. These plans must be reviewed and approved by the council. The project must also provide financial assurance for the decommissioning in the event that the project is no longer able to complete the process. Assuming the project decommissions while still under full control of the developer, these costs will be paid by the certificate holder directly. And this basically wraps up my part of the presentation for the evening. Before I end, I'd like to remind everyone how they can submit comments for this proposal. You can send in written comments by email to comments@fsec.wa.gov. Listed up there. You can also get that information from us afterwards. You can also send it in through postal service, or you can actually call it in as well. When we're in one of those several formal processes of public comment, then we also have an online portal that's available, and comments can be submitted through in that way as well. All comments that are received, whether regardless of the timing or the method of delivery, get saved with the project record and are available to the council and the staff for their review. So thank you for your attention to that. If you have questions, we can address those when we get to the question part. In the meantime, I'll pass it over to Susan to go ahead and lead us through the presentation about the project itself.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who is here in the room tonight and those of you who are joining us online for being here, and extend our sincere thanks to the FSEC staff for hosting us tonight and all week long. We appreciate it very much. This is an innovative project. It's essential to helping Washington and Oregon achieve their clean energy goals and to help meet the challenges of the climate crisis. Before I share our presentation and take your questions, I want to acknowledge that this area is within the ancestral home and territories of the indigenous people of the Columbia River. This acknowledgement doesn't take the place of authentic relationships with tribal nations, but it serves as the first step in our commitment to honoring and respecting tribal interests and cultural resources in the proposed project area. Before I get into the deck, there's 5 highlights about the project that I'd like you to keep in mind as I share the presentation. First of all, this is a 100-mile transmission line. It's 81 miles underwater, under the Columbia Riverbed, and 19 miles underground. It runs between the Dalles in Oregon and the Rivergate section of Portland. It comes out of the water to bypass the Bonneville Dam for 7.5 miles underground. It avoids negative impacts of overhead transmission lines, visual, wildlife habitat, and wildfire risk. It will be built over a 36-month period, and in-river construction will take place in the winter to avoid impacts to fisheries. While marine transmission is not common in the Pacific Northwest, but it is commonly used around the world. Our company has built 2 such projects and operates these on the East Coast today. And this is the situation. To meet the climate change crisis, Washington and Oregon have passed bold clean energy goals for their utilities. In Washington, CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, requires that 80% of energy be carbon neutral by 2030. And 100% by 2045. In Oregon, House Bill 2021 requires 80% carbon-free by 2030, 90% by 2035, and 100% by 2040. Unfortunately, what's missing is the electricity transmission needed to make these goals a reality. This is the situation. In its most recent Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, a planning document that PGE is required to submit to the PUC, They stated that it's impossible for them to meet their 2030 emission target without upgrading and building new transmission lines. The need is most definitely urgent. There is currently minimal to no available east to west transmission capacity. The resources are on the east side of the Cascades and the demand is on the west side. There are stranded renewables east of the Cascades. This project came about because two of our project team members were trying to develop solar in the area, and there's plenty of places to build, but there's no way to connect to the grid. The BPA line, what's known as the BPA queue, or the list of projects waiting to connect to the transmission grid, is hundreds of projects long. There's increasing energy demand here due to population growth, electrification of the transportation and building sectors, growth of the chip industry. That alone has put an incredible stress on the transmission capacity of the existing system, and that's before you get to the clean energy requirements that we just discussed. And there's a challenge with overhead wires and towers. They're hard to permit because of their visual impacts, and the risk to wildfires, as you know, is extensive. Let me here talk to you.
Testing. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, my name is Ernie Griggs, and I've been in this industry for a long, long time, more years than I particularly want to talk about, but I've been in the generation side. I've been in the transmission side. I have a hydroelectric background, and I have a high voltage direct current transmission background. The first project I started with regards to HVDC was back in 1985. So it's kept me busy, and it's been a fun technology to watch transition. So the slide that you've got up there, the technology is proven. There are quite a number of projects in the world. Europe is so far out in front of us in making the transition away from fossil fuels and into renewables, and utilizing HVDC technology as a means to be able to deliver that energy to the load centers is significant there. The United Kingdom has been doing it for a long time. Germany certainly is out in front. If you want to do some research, just search on Google for HVDC interconnector, and that will take you to projects all over the world. What you see in the lower left-hand picture is a cross-section of the cable itself. You've got the large copper center conductor, and the purpose of that, the voltage on it will be about plus or minus 320,000 volts, and that's constant 24/7, 365 for as long as 40 years. That's not an unusual length of time for a project like this and the cables that support it. This sort of brownish area here is the insulation, and that insulation is what allows the copper conductor to be at such a high voltage. And around it, this is all the armor and the strength that's built into this cable. And I'll explain why the strength really matters in a couple of minutes. And it's about 6 inches or a little less. This is a cell phone. It's actually Susan's cell phone, which is right next to it, to give you an idea of how big this cable is in diameter. Now, over here on the right-hand side, this is looking at the cable bundle that we would be looking to install in the river. It's about 1 foot wide. There's 3 cables, 1, 2, and in the middle, there's a fiber optic cable. The purpose of the fiber optic cable is because the control systems for the HVDC converters, they require the ability to talk to each other through high-speed digital technology. So that's the purpose of that particular cable in that bundle. Basically, these cables are wrapped together, and we'll show you in a couple of minutes how that's deployed. Now, in order for us to deliver power into Portland, we need to pull that power from a large substation that has the ability to deliver it. We've selected up here, what we have is basically a converter station that's right next to the Big Eddy substation at 500,000 volts. We take the 500,000 volts AC and convert it to DC. So we've got transmission system supply. That substation is going to take power from the Eastern renewable suppliers, solar, wind. That's where the supply is going to come from. So we convert it to DC, and that basically comes down the river. We need to pop out and go around Bonneville Dam. Trying to work through Bonneville Dam is not something that will work. Then we go back into the river at Hamilton Island. So we pop out here in Stevenson. We pop back in at Hamilton Island. We pick up the river again. And again, the burial of a DC cable within the riverbed of the Columbia River is definitely feasible. We've installed cable within the Hudson River. We've installed cable in the Raritan River in New Jersey and gone through the Atlantic Ocean to come up into Long Island in New York. And then down in this end, down in Portland, we will come ashore at Hayden Island. From there, we will find our cable's way across into the converter station that's located in the Rivergate Industrial Complex. From there, we can reconvert it back to 230,000 volts AC and connect to the PG&E Harborton substation. Next, let's see. Okay, got it. So here, what you're looking at here is basically a close-up of the two ends. You've got the dowels, and I'll actually get a little closer. It's a little hard to see. I realize that. It'll be better able to see when you can pick it up on the web. You've got the substation. You've got the converter station. You've got this yellow line represents the DC cable all the way down to the river. At that point, we use a technology called horizontal directional drill. We will actually bore down underneath I-84. We'll take it out into the river, out away from the marina and out away from the shore. And at that point, we will pull conduit, HDPE conduit that's large enough to hold our cable. We'll pull conduit back into what's called a drill pit. At that point, we'll create a transition joint. That transition joint will allow us to connect the submarine style cable to the underground cable, something that we've done before as well. So this is the point where we make the transition from submarine into upland cable. This yellow represents the upland cable to get back to the converter station up by Big Eddy. Also, there's HVDC of a different generation up there. Solilo is the converter station that the Pacific DC Intertie built quite a number of years ago and takes power down to California. So this technology is not new to the industry. What we are seeing with what we're providing is voltage source conversion. That is a new generation of technology to be applied. Over here, this gives you the idea. What we're doing here is, again, we're bringing the cable onto shore or onto land beyond the shore. Again, it's going to be through HED technology to get it in. Then from there, we will find the way over to our converter station. And from there, we bring it back over, go under the Willamette River, and connect into the 230 kV system for PGE. This gives you an idea here of a bit of the challenge as far as getting the cable around the dam. So what you see here is we will land the cable. Over by the interpretive center is where we will set up the drill bit to drill out into the river. We'll go under the road, we'll go under the railroad. And out here was where we will start our transition, where we'll have the conduits that will pick up the cable. From there, we come down 14. We'll go up Ash Lake Road and go back around. We'll pick up 14 again, come down this way. And here we go back into the river using the same technology strategy to be able to do that. That in turn leaves Bonneville Dam alone. It also leaves the fishing alone. And also there's another incentive too. There's quite a bit of rock and rubble on the riverbed in that area stretch. So actually burying the cable there would be a challenge. This is a typical converter station. It's one that's in service in California. The Transbay cable utilizes that converter station. It's using the new VSC technology. What you see here is, whoop, go backwards. Okay, try again. All right, so this is the converter hall. That's where the power electronics are that actually convert the AC to DC or the DC back to AC. The control building is here, the back. And here is where you've also got part of your cooling system. We do have to cool the valves that actually do the conversion process. As a practical matter, the losses are pretty small. We only have about 1% loss in a converter station, and that's, in today's technology, that's pretty darn good. This is also part of the cooling system here. This is where the AC connection is made. 3 single-phase transformers that allow us to take the network AC voltage and connect it into the converter. And the DC cable will go out over here, and that's the basic 2 connection points to that are 2 cables, 1 DC cable, 1 AC cable. This slide indicates how, with a surface laying mechanism through a barge type system, we will be on the surface of the river. We will have a full reel of cable for each of the 2 conductors located on the barge. From that, what we will do is, as we showed back in the previous picture where it was going off the back end of the barge, here, what you see is the cable is held in catenary down to something called a hydroplow. And the hydroplow has the ability to take the cable into what's called a stinger. And basically, it's a big tube with a funnel on top. The cable bundle goes into that. That stinger can rotate to control depth. We have the ability to establish the depth. The cable itself comes out at the bottom of the trench. So as we move this forward, the cable is installed at the bottom of the trench. On the front of the stinger, there are high pressure water jets. And that high pressure water actually cuts about an 18-inch wide trench in the silt and the riverbed. And that trench, the sediment goes into emulsion. And what happens is, as the cable is laid here, as we pass by, the sediments fall out of suspension and go right back into the trench. And it's a lay burial mechanism in one pass. So our time in any point in the river is relatively short. Our impact is relatively low. I won't say, well, somewhat benign. So we take samples ahead of time to make sure we understand if there's any contaminants there. We also survey the river to make sure that we understand about obstacles so that we don't get surprised. We also understand too, if we need to make adjustments as we're in the river, where we have a marine surveyor on there as well. We will be monitoring the turbidity as we do the installation. That'll be part of the process as well. And that, again, it's a fairly simple operation, all things considered. And that's it for the moment for me.
There we go. It's hot. You're looking at a rather condensed version of our project schedule. Well, what you see in the columns looks forward by about 5.5 to 6 years. It's important to remember when you're looking at this that we didn't just start this project. We've been hard at work on the project for the last 4 years or even a little more. And we've focused a lot of our efforts on the areas toward the top of the chart. We've participated in the Northern Grid planning process since 2020. We've done an awful lot of studies, desktop analysis, gathering information, publicly available information to inform our permitting process. We even spot surveyed certain areas of the river. We, 4 years ago, we had a line that went from the Dalles to Portland in the river. And now through walking the route, driving the route, looking at it, navigable charts of what's in the water, bridges, environmental sensitivities, cultural sensitivities, we've come up with a route that we think is both buildable and permittable. And we understand that we may need to continue to tweak that, but that's all going to inform the permitting process as we submit our state and federal permits. We've also spent a lot of time finding real estate to site the project in that occupies public right-of-ways and avoids as much as possible any private occupation of private lands. Once we receive our permits, we will begin the environmental, engineering and procurement of construction phase, or we call EPC, and that's the actual building of the project. We estimate that it'll take 30 to 36 months for the construction, leading to an online commercial operation date in the middle of 2029. We think this is a manageable schedule, and it's very similar to the schedule that we followed in our Hudson and Neptune projects on the East Coast. We've touched on some of these key features already, but just to put them in one place, it is a clean energy project. It will be able to help Oregon and Washington achieve their clean energy goals. It has the capacity to power 800,000 homes. And in addition to helping with the clean energy goals, it will provide a source of clean, affordable energy to the homes on the west side of the Cascades. And it will also provide resiliency and stability to the grid. It has a very low impact construction. The project is designed to avoid impacts to sensitive cultural and natural resources. It avoids habitats, visual and wildfire impacts of overhead transmission. We know that the project will bring lots of jobs to the area. At the height of construction, we expect to see 300 to 400 highly skilled union jobs for local jobs and apprenticeship programs during the peak of construction. Some of those jobs will be at the converter stations, and some of those jobs will be for the underground burial process. This project will cost approximately $1.5 billion, and there will be no public money requested to do that. It'll be completely privately funded. We're not seeking tax breaks, and we plan to contribute to the communities we are occupying, where the cable is buried, and occupy the communities we occupy, and will contribute to the local tax base there. The Columbia River Gorge is an absolutely beautiful natural resource. We fully intend to respect and protect the Columbia Gorge resource as we built this project. We understand that we will be subject to a multi-year public review by federal, state, and local agencies, and we intend to comply with all of the requirements of those reviews. For as long as we've been coming out here and talking about this project, every time we meet with someone, one of the first things they say to us is, "Have you talked to the tribes?" We have taken this to heart, and we have talked to the tribes. We've spoken to the Columbia River tribes, the Critvik, other tribes in the area. We've made presentations to the tribes. We've done all that we can to establish a relationship with the tribes, and we are fully committed to keeping that door open and making ourselves available to the tribes to understand what their concerns are and address them to the best of our ability. We also get asked pretty frequently, what is the impact of the cable on marine life? What about EMF? I like to turn this question over to Ernie because he's much more expert about it than.
So with regards to the cable, there's an electrical field, and I mentioned in the cross section that the outer part of the cable is all shielded and grounded. So the electrical field will be contained within the cable. The electromagnetic field is inductive, and it has the ability to radiate out to some degree. And that's why there's the concern that people have over EMF with regards to our cable as it lays there in the bottom of the river. As a practical matter, the EMF that is a natural background EMF, just for the polarity of the Earth, is about 54 microtesla. Microtesla is the unit of measure that's the accepted international standard for EMF. So the background field is 54 EMF, and we are able, technically with today's technology, to be able to model our cable based on our voltage, based on our power delivery current. We are able to establish what the level would be at the river bottom, the riverbed. It will be 5 microtesla at full load. Now, if we reduce the power in half, then it'll drop to 2.5. So as a practical matter, we're at most 10% of the naturally occurring EMF there in the river. So what we can say is we are not a strong contributor of incremental EMF to what's already there. And that's an important part of the discussion. There are also studies that have been done by measurements taken by other cable systems that are actually in service. In fact, one of the studies created, I think it was by Bohm, they studied our cable as well, our Neptune cable, as part and parcel of their overview, trying to understand the whole science behind it. And the results were the same as far as the magnitude of contribution versus the background level. So that'll give you guys a sense of order of magnitude as to how big a problem it is or isn't. And we feel that it's consistent with other HVDC cables in the world, and it's relatively minor. So
Thank you. And as we've talked about, the construction is a low impact process, especially thanks to our hydroplow, which is a rather benign installation along the river bottom with pretty minimal disruption to the sediment. The installation in the river will occur during seasonal work windows that'll be prescribed by both states and the Army Corps, presumably falling in the late fall and early winter months to avoid impacts to fisheries and river recreation use. And we have a strong environmental track record that we're proud of. After 28 years of operation combined, our 2 similar projects in the East Coast have reported no adverse environmental impacts, and that's exactly the record we look forward to achieving here as well. We need a lot of permits. We will need permits from both states and the federal permits from the Army Corps, and we're familiar with this process. When we worked in New York and New Jersey, we had a similar process. We worked with both states and the Army Corps there. It's a little bit unique here because when we're coming down the river, the state line doesn't run right down the middle of the river. So that path in the river for constructability, for the safe environmentally and river construction wise, we kind of go back and forth through the river. So that is why it's really important to us that we're able to coordinate this process with both states, because we go back and forth. It's not down one side for a complete stretch. As part of the Army Corps process, Army Corps will most likely, as the federal agency, they'll be the lead permitting agency most likely, and we will be subject to review of the National Environmental Policy Act. They'll study our impacts to fish, our impacts to wetlands, impacts to pretty much everything is covered under the Environmental Policy Act review. We'll also be subject to a National Historic Policy Act, Section 106 consultation with the tribal nations. This is a government to government process, which we are not involved in. But as I mentioned earlier, we are absolutely committed to continuing to establish our relationship with the tribes, supporting the Section 106 process, and continuing our relationship with the tribes. Our Washington FSEC process is what brings us here tonight. We submitted a pre-application request in December. These public meetings are the next step in that process, as Stu outlined earlier, and we plan to submit the full application to the FSEC in a few months, second quarter 2024. In Oregon, we're going through a similar process with their FSEC without the E in that case, on that side of the river. It's a siting process. We submitted what they call a notice of intent to Oregon FSAC in March of last year. We held public meetings in Oregon, in the Dalles and Portland following that. And then we received back from the Oregon FSAC what's called a project order, and it's a detailed requirements for what our full permit will contain when we submit it there. And we are working on that and plan to submit it also in the second quarter of this year. We'll also be required to comply with permits and approvals from the affected municipalities, Portland, the Dalles, Stevenson, North Bonneville, et cetera. We will need interconnection agreements with BPA and Portland General Electric. And this is all ongoing, as I said, officially kicked off in the first quarter of 2023. Ernie?
Okay, I mentioned a little bit ago that we would have a list of projects that we could use for example. And the way this table is structured, I'm actually going to start at the bottom and the bottom right. The first project we identify is 2003, relatively low voltage, 150 kV, relatively low power at 330 megawatts. It goes under Long Island Sound and connects Connecticut to Long Island, New York. Long Island, New York was a load center that literally electrically was as much of an island as it is physically. And they had some of the highest rates in the country. And so the demand was almost imperative for the leaders of New York and Long Island to be able to increase the supply available to the electric customers in Long Island. BassLink connects Australia across the Bass Strait into Tasmania. The purpose there was a little bit different. Tasmania has a wonderful supply of renewables, and they were able to bring that into mainland Australia. What you see from 2003 to 2005 is a larger project, 400,000 volts, 500 megawatts, 230 miles of cable. And as you can see, it's starting to increase its delivery. And Neptune was right on the heels of that. And we went commercial in 2007, and we've got 500 kV, 660 megawatts, and that included the Atlantic Ocean as well as upland cable, both on Long Island. Again, we're back to Long Island needing supply. They needed more supply than what they had available to them with their fossil fuel plants, even back then. So Transbay Cable was the first significant VSC project in the United States. When I say VSC, the type of conversion, voltage source conversion versus the earlier stage type of conversion, LCC. Our Hudson project came on the heels of that in 2013, also 660 megawatts. And this one only has a small amount of miles, but those miles matter. We're coming out of New Jersey. We're coming into Manhattan. The population density is significant. The electric demand is significant. And the ability to do things in New York is also significant, as we experienced. It's not simple working in New York. Borwind 2 and Borwind 3, offshore North Sea supply. You have to put a converter station on a platform out in the ocean. Cables deliver that into Germany as part of their supply mix, and they continue to increase and add the number of offshore supply as we speak. I think they're up to 5 or 6 of those, perhaps more at this point. The rest of these are intercountry supply, and what the countries do is they use the benefits of the supply in different countries to support the other country as to how they do it. UK to France, no surprise. Norway to the UK. UK has been out in front of finding an alternative supply for 10, 15 years. It's been a long time that they've been really, really working hard at not being an isolated island with only their supply to get them through. Nordlink, again, significant Germany to Norway. It's no surprise that Norway's part of it. They have large supply of hydro. That's part of what they do. And that's one of the reasons why they have these interconnectors. So this table, if you decide you want to go look on the web to get an example of some interconnectors that are out there, this slide can help point you in the direction as to how to find that information. So.
We've mentioned and talked a little bit about our other projects throughout the evening, and that's because we're very proud of them. Now, PowerBridge is built and now operates 2 underwater transmission projects in the New York, New Jersey area. Our first project was the Neptune Regional Transmission System. It was completed in 2007 at the cost of $650 million. Neptune links Long Island, the Long Island Power Authority, with the PJM interconnection. It's a transmission operating system representing linking 17 states in the eastern Midwest, and it gives Long Island, in particular, in the case of Neptune, much broader access to an energy supply that they wouldn't ever otherwise have access to. Neptune is 65 miles long. It's 660 megawatts HVDC. It's 51 miles under the Raritan River and the Atlantic Ocean, and 14 miles underground, coming up Jones Beach, which is an iconic state park in New York, and then underground on the Wantagh State Parkway in Long Island. The Hudson project was completed in 2013 at $850 million cost. It also links New York, in this case Manhattan, to the PJM network. It's a 7-mile cable. It runs 3 miles underground in New Jersey and 4 miles under the Hudson River. It connects to a Con Edison substation in Midtown Manhattan. This is important to us, our values and commitment to you. The way we do business is we try to be honest. We don't like to cut corners because we've seen that it doesn't work. We like to do what we say we're going to do. We respect you. We will engage openly, honestly, and respectfully with all local, state, federal, and tribal governments and residents. We will go above and beyond to meet and exceed all permitting and regulatory requirements to build and operate this project. We are responsive. If you have a question, please ask it. We'll answer it if we can, and if we can't, we'll get you the answer as soon as we can. And we recognize that we're asking you to welcome us into your community. We want to be a good neighbor. We'll partner with local residents and communities to support organizations and causes to advance the environmental, social, and economic interests of the region. We appreciate you hearing us out, and we're available to answer any questions you may.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan, and your team. So we have we have over 20 folks online. So folks who are online, if you have questions, I urge you to use the raise your hand function and we'll get to you. Before that, I want to turn to the folks who are here in the room. Except before that, I want to invite Chris Clark, who's with the Oregon Department of Energy and Oregon Energy Facility Site Council. Chris, if you're there and you're able to, or if you're hearing me, haven't stepped away from your computer. If you're there, you go. See, you've unmuted. If you could say a few words for the record and for folks here, that'd be great.
Hey, Stu, thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you great.
Great. Yeah, as you said, my name is Chris Clark. I'm a senior siting analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy, and will be supporting the Oregon Energy Facility Siting Council's state-level permitting review of this project. As Susan mentioned a little earlier, we completed our pre-application process last spring, and we're looking forward to beginning our application review once we receive the application later this year. We just wanted everybody to be aware that that review will also include more public informational meetings as well as additional opportunities for public review and comment. So if anybody would like to learn more about the Oregon process, you can either visit oregon.gov/energy, or you can just feel free to contact me at christopher.clark@energy.oregon.gov. And I'll also be around for the Q&A session if any questions come up about the Oregon process. Other than that, just thanks so much to the whole team at Washington FSEC for coordinating. We really appreciate that. This should be a comprehensive view of the project. And as you mentioned earlier, we know that fish don't stay on one side of the river. So we're glad that we can work with you and make sure that this project is thoroughly evaluated. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, most of the projects we work with are strictly in the state of Washington. We don't have these complications, but we went down to Salem and met with Chris and the folks down there over a year ago to start coordinating and to make sure we got this all right. So we're at all their hearings. They're going to be at all our hearings, and really making sure that we're all getting the same message and we're all working together. So I know dinner's probably waiting for folks, but we actually have time to get all your questions answered and still get out of here early the way we're going right now. So are there any folks who, that was the only dumb question is the question that didn't get asked? So, no hesitation, please. Any questions or things you'd like more information on, either from the regulatory process or from these folks? Anybody got a question they'd like to ask? Oh, and I'm sorry, we got the format is, I'm going to ask you to say your name if you would and spell it if that's.
Hi, my name is Albert. And out of all the generation plants, how many of them are publicly owned? How many of them are privately owned? It's the wind, the wild horse, horse feather, all these different ones. How many of them are privately owned and how many of them are publicly owned?
I can't testify to that. I mean, I know that in Washington, it's like Seattle. The city of Seattle has its own, has the Seattle Power and Light, Tacoma Power and Light. So they have privately owned generating facilities. But for example, in Olympia, it's all we're dealing with the Puget Sound Energy, and then they're both they have their own facilities, and then they get energy from private facilities. So most of the things that are being put in most of the new things are private developers, as I understand it. And tell me your name again. Albert McAdie. Great, thank you so much. Follow up any of that, or? Okay, great. Okay. Other questions? Yes, please. And again, you heard the drill, right?
My name is Peter. I'm with Operating Engineers. You had mentioned in the presentation there was about 300 to 400 union jobs that would be secured for the project itself. Of that number, do we have any idea how many would be behind to maintain or run the facility itself once it's fully complete?
The converter stations will have a permanent staff on either end of probably 20 to 24 employees.
20 at each end?
Total, no.
Oh, total. Okay.
Total, so 10 to 12 at each end.
Also, the operating engineers represent Siemens Energy employees who operate and maintain our Neptune and Hudson projects in New York. So you could get some information through that pathway if you chose.
And also, the converter facilities require maintenance periods, and during those maintenance periods, subcontractors are brought in to do electrical and trade type services on a subcontracting basis, not permanent employees, but.
And for folks who don't know it, just as in general, the shift to clean energy, it used to be you just had one like coal plant in Wyoming that was sending energy straight to Seattle or Portland, and so it's one line. But with renewable energy, you need a lot more transmission lines. So this is probably the first of what could be a number of projects. So it's great. People who are working on these are learning skills for the next ones, because the future is going to involve probably a lot more transmission lines than what we have now. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I apologize. I had a lot of my questions already answered, so all I have left are some really pointy-headed questions. So, my name is Rudy Salicori. What is the radius of that 5 microtesla magnetic field? It's one of 3.
It's an excellent question. And basically what happens is if you were to take and go along the riverbed with your measuring device, what you would see is a very steep curve up and a very steep curve back down. So the 5 microtesla, if we were carrying full load, would be right over the cable, and it diminishes very quickly in about 5 feet in either direction. And by the time you're 10 feet out, it doesn't know it's there.
Anyone else before I go on to more obscure questions? I asked this earlier and I got an answer, but I wanted to get a little bit of clarity. So the cable is apparently buried at a depth that should leave it kind of invulnerable to anchor strikes. But if the cable is damaged, can you talk about the repair procedure, how long it would be in the water and how that might impact in-water work windows?
Understood. That's an excellent question. In fact, the Transbay cable suffered an anchor strike, and that, from the insurance point of view, anchor strikes are the #1 cause of cable damage, but they are infrequent and they don't happen. It's not a regular occurrence, it's an abnormal occurrence. Now, as a practical matter, what happens when you have a cable fault? It will be detected by both converters, and the electric power basically is shut down immediately so that it doesn't contribute to the fault. So you've got the situation where your voltage has flashed over to the ground shield. You've got your system is shut down. In today's world, a cable like what we're talking about here would have fiber optic built into the cable where you can actually sort of quickly determine where testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm back. All right, so basically what happens is if you've got the right monitoring on the cable, you can come pretty close to where it's going to be. And then what you need to do is you need to get a there. You need a barge. You need the ability to put divers down. You need to understand how in the river flow cycle you're able to put divers in there. And what you do is you go down and you start to excavate, and you use basically an air jet type of technology where you're able to move the silt around. You get down to the fault location. Then what you can do is you actually can cut the cable on both sides of the fault. You've got spare cable sitting on your barge. And what you do is you bring the cable out of its trench, you put it onto the barge, you splice the cable to the spare cable, and then you start to lower that back in. But you've also picked up the other end of the cable that was cut. You bring that up and you splice that into the cable, and then you have this omega loop, and you lower that back into the cable and back into the riverbed, and then you use the air jetting to let it settle back into its depth in the river bottom. Now, how long does it take? Well, the trickiest part is making sure that you found the fault. And once you've got that, that can take anywhere from a day to a week. And then once you start the repair process, you're probably talking 2 to 3 weeks to be able to execute it, maybe 4. Does that answer your question? Is that
Yes,
pretty good sense of it? Yeah, it's river work, it's marine work, it's divers, and it's something that the people that come in to do that and supervise that work, they understand how it's done. I've watched these guys do it for real, and they're pretty damn good at what they do.
I have one more question, but I think it might be even too esoteric. It was going to be around how you control what kind of energy, because I think you mentioned that it would be renewable energy that would be transmitted down this, but once you're in the Western power
Jeff,
market, how do you
I'm going to
actually?
turn that over to my compatriot, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jeff Wood with PowerBridge. A very good question, and one that we really don't control. We're a transmission provider, and we just provide a path to move electrons, and we can't tell really if they're green electrons coming into one end or not. But what I would tell you is take a look at the BPA queue for interconnection requests by generators. There are thousands of megawatts that are being requested to connect to BPA, and almost all of those are renewable energy projects. They're solar plants, and their wind plants, and their storage facilities. And 95% of those requests are all on the eastern side of the Cascades. And as we talked about here earlier today, the load is really pulling all of that energy to the western side of the Cascade. So while we don't control it, what we are is a vehicle to get some of those projects built. I wasn't able to make the public meeting last night because I was tied up with some meetings with Portland General yesterday. But on the night before, I was talking to someone, and they were telling us how in their community they had 2 solar projects ready to go, but they couldn't get transmission to deliver that energy to where it's needed. And so they're still waiting for transmission access. And so that's what we think our project will do, is to provide a pathway for a lot of these projects that are going to connect to BPA, but need a way to get to the market. And we view ourselves as sort of that last mile solution to get the energy over the Cascades and into where all the load is on the eastern side of the Cascades. And as Stu mentioned, there's going to be other projects that are built. One project that got built in Oregon not too long ago, well, it's in the process. It's the B2H project, and that's to access wind from Wyoming, which runs at a different time than the wind in Washington and Oregon. So it helps supplement when the wind's not blowing here, you'd have access to wind there. And that wind ties very closely to when you have winter loads, really cold weather here, the wind happens to blow very highly in Wyoming. So it's finding ways to coordinate all that energy and being able to use it between the different markets. When you have a high hydro year here, some of that is sent down on the DC lines that go down to California. You supplement, you pull back some of the solar from California and save your hydro here when you don't need it. So that's what the HVDC transmission links are designed to do.
I should probably mention briefly about controllability. One of the things that HVDC provides is the ability to control power transfer across the interconnector. And that's extremely important to be able to manage as things change. The system operators can put in the value that they want to see delivered at the receiving end.
I'll just give my layman's comment on the that question about the renewable energy, because a lot of folks said, well, we we'll support this cable as long as it's just taking renewable energy, but the idea of the grid is you really don't know what electrons are going where, and then the better the grid is and the more options there are, the better. But what we're hearing from folks in the renewable industry is that the bottleneck right now is getting power from from new wind and solar facilities to the load in Seattle and Portland. And so this really meets the bottleneck that would allow more renewable energy to get onto the grid. As I understand it, as I have been told, Simone Auger or Auger, I'm not sure how to correctly say your name, but I see your hand up on the online. You want to mute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. It's Simone Auger, but that was a good attempt. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have 3 questions, and I'll make them very brief. I really appreciate the presentation. I appreciate the time that everyone's putting into this. My first question is, will there be alternatives explored to include transmission service to the Washington side of the river? Only Oregon is considered in this project, and being in Clark County, we have needs as well, and so that would be something I'd like addressed.
Sure. This is Jeff Wood again. So while our project connects on the western side in Oregon and then runs down and connects to a Portland substation, when you look at the AC overall AC interconnection grid, we provide about 30%, I would say, of our. So if we look at 1,100 megawatts, about 300 megawatts. We reduce the stress on the AC system that goes across what's called Cross Cascades North. And that's what follows all the way up into Puget Sound Energy. And so that by connecting into Portland where we do, we push back and allow about 30% of the value of this line will really feed up into the Washington side of the AC grid.
30% of the value?
30% of the megawatts of our, so we're like 1,100 megawatts. So somewhere around 25 to 30%, call that 300 megawatts of this capacity will really be beneficial to the Washington side of the AC grid.
And are you talking about just up north, or are you talking about local in, communities adjacent to the project? Obviously it's impacting Clark County on the Skamania count, or on the, bypassing the Bonneville Dam. So
understand. And so if you view the AC grid as making a semicircle from, call the farther out east, a semicircle around into Washington and down to Seattle, past, and then all the way back to Portland, that whole area will be relieved on the AC grid by our project, and we'll be able to allow more energy to then flow into that portion of and so some of that will definitely get to you as well. I couldn't put a number on it as to what it actually is.
Okay. Second question, are any of the projects, the examples that were provided in similar situations where, we have vital traditional foods with the salmon, and then we have, the challenges of the Columbia River or the Columbia Basin salmon crisis, and it's fresh water. So are any of the projects examples, do they have similar challenges and criteria that were met successfully?
That's an excellent question. And I think the best thing we should do for that is to reach out to folks we work with internationally and dig deeper for better information than we have here this evening. So I'd like to take that question as something that we can get back to you with better information as to some of the environmental and challenges that were addressed by the various projects that are out there. But tonight I can't speak to those off the top of my head.
Do you know when you might be able to address that, and what will that be, yourself, or will that just be through the EIS process, or how will that communication come through?
Well, first of all, it will absolutely be addressed through the environmental studies and the ESA process. I'd also like to add that our project in New York, the Neptune project, was built in an area that had environmental protected sturgeon, and it was studied, and we were found, and working through the work windows, we were studied before and after the project, and we were found to have no impact on them, and all of that for the fish and marine life here will be studied as well. I don't know that we could provide you certainly on the international projects studies for what took place over there, but there are studies from the Trans-Bay project that we talked a little bit about on salmon. Yeah, that we could make available to you the impact long-term before and after installation on that project.
Okay, last question real quick. Is there any Spanish language translation at meetings? Are you providing outreach to Spanish-speaking communities?
We do have we have a handout that we've made available tonight and online that is translated into Spanish, and we can make that available to you if you'd like.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Simone.
Thanks, Simone. And just to say on the regulatory side, the members of the Oregon Fish and Wildlife and Washington Fish and Wildlife have been working together to again identify what studies need to be done to make sure that there will not be harms to anadromous fish, and then the developer will be carrying out those studies, and as the regulators will be looking to see that studies were done properly and that the results indicate that using the results of those studies to determine whether or not the protections are sufficient enough to support moving forward with the project. There was earlier a hand online. Is there anyone else? Anyone else? Did someone let their hand get down? Want to put it back up? Or anyone else in the room have questions you'd like to ask? Again, these are great questions, super helpful. Please, again, if you could just say your name and spell it if you think we need it.
Hey, Selecki, what is the operational lifespan of the cable? Thank you.
Testing. The typical lifespan for these projects is 40 years. We have representative projects out there that are 60 years in existence for the cable and the converters. Now, the converters, because they're electrical mechanical, they do require some upgrades over time, especially with the printed circuit electronic control systems. Those do tend to go obsolete a little faster, but they're long-term, high reliable systems. Our systems were running at 99.8% availability over the past couple of years. Highly reliable, long-term physical assets that are capable of delivering as good in year 40 as they did in year 1. So that's not a problem as far as being able to be reliable, and reliability matters as far as what we're talking about too. Not only do we add the ability to deliver energy and allow, as we've said, other reliable systems to be able to supply, we add to the reliability of the system. And what I'll use for an example is where we connect at Harborton, just across the Willamette from Northwest Portland. Basically, we're in the heart of their supply growth, or not their supply, but their load growth. They're seeing PGE is seeing significant growth in demand, and our 5-acre converter station is the equivalent of an 1,100 megawatt generator. What it doesn't have is it doesn't have coal piles, doesn't have oil tanks, it doesn't have natural gas pipelines. It's got a cable system that is out of sight, out of mind, and delivers the electrical equivalent of an 1,100 megawatt generator. And that in and of itself adds to the reliability in an area where the load growth is literally making it difficult on their electrical system. So I hope I've answered your question, but it's not just one part of it. It's a complicated answer. But we are reliable for a long time, and we deliver that.
All right, we had a question on chat about when the presentation would be available, and the presentations from the last 2 nights are already up online on our website, and this one will be available within 24 hours is our goal. Again, name.
Ben Shoemaker, Stevenson. You talked about the EMF radiation for the underground or underwater portion. Is it similar for the underground portion? And then does FSEC have prescriptive standards for that the project will be reviewed under for that?
Yes, we understand what the standards are for EMF. I didn't quote those for this evening. I apologize for that. But similarly, we're buried about 4 feet down at, I believe is it 30 inches, John? 30 or 36 inches above is where the standard is measured. And if I remember the standard now, No, I shouldn't quote it out of memory and have it be incorrect, but basically there's the standard. And again, we're low on the scale of contribution at that point. And we also have the ability to compare that to AC overhead transmission and how we stack up against those folks. We have that information available. We can get it to you.
And I will attempt to first answer the question, and counting on Maria or anyone else, and of our other folks who are online. But as I understand, for example, for the EMF under the water, FSEC doesn't have separate standards for that, but the Department of Ecology, as my understanding, does. And or if they don't have standards, they know what the levels need to be to not to protect fisheries. So FSEC not exactly hires, but FSEC contracts with the Department of Ecology to review an issue like that and use the state standards that are associated with that. Is that helpful? And I'm not seeing anyone else jumping in to supersede that. Any other questions? Here we go.
A. Selecki, one more thing. You're saying that this is meeting the need of the transmission. Does this cable meet that need? Or if this is a successful project, will multiple cables need to be ran down the Columbia to go to 100% green? Thank you.
Practically speaking, I can't identify what projects will be proposed and built in the future. What this will demonstrate is that HVDC transmission has a place in the transition of supply from what was coal, hydro, oil, natural gas. It's going to be part of the transition. I can give you a real world example. We do a lot of work with Siemens Energy. They're the ones that design and build our converter stations. There's an engineer that we've worked with for, good God, almost 20 years now. And it's funny, and we went commercial with Neptune in 2007. Now, we talked about Germany already being way out in front as far as what they're doing. They've ordered their nuclear plants closed. They're bringing in a lot of offshore wind. This will give you an idea of how far out in front their thinking is. He was on his way to San Francisco to an IEEE meeting, and he stopped at our Sayreville converter station, and we were talking about various technical matters and so on and so forth. And with all sincerity, he looks at me and he says, "Ernie, do you think it's too early to talk about HVDC networks?" And what he was talking about was the ability to connect HVDC interconnectors together and treat them as an operating network, just like we treat the AC system as an operating network today. I mean, they were so far out in front of us, and I kind of looked at them, and I'm like, well, you are kind of in the United States, and we're kind of not there yet, but there are people out there that are already working on how to take, for instance, multi-terminal. There's a project that I was part of years ago where they have a 3-terminal system. So the supply is up near Hudson's Bay. They take power off in the Montreal area, and then they deliver power to Boston, and they manage that as they control the rectifier supply and the inverter taking it off the DC circuit. So this is going to continue to evolve long after I'm gone, for sure. Jeff?
Just wanted to add a little bit more, just local focus on what's going on in the region here. As Stu mentioned, there's more than likely a fair amount of transmission that's going to be required to be built out in the region in order to make this transition to a cleaner form of energy production, electricity production, while at the same time there's a significant amount of growth going on. Part of that is electrification of vehicles and things like that. So there's a lot of need. There are other transmission projects that are being proposed right now. They're overhead lines that are 230 kV, and they're proposing to expand them to 500 kV lines. one aspect about our project that will be beneficial, we're ahead of those projects from a permitting perspective. And if we can get our project built and constructed, it creates a little bit of cushion in the system to then be able to allow those lines to be taken out of service, upgraded to a higher level along existing right of ways. They still got to go through their entire permitting process for those projects as well. But there's two projects that I know about right now that are being proposed, one by BPA, one by PGE, that are existing high voltage transmission lines. They're looking to expand to higher voltages, but staying within the existing right of way. I don't envision the Columbia becoming a pathway for multiple transmission lines. It's been challenging enough for us to just find one route down the river that we felt one was comfortable from a permitting perspective, but then also that we felt comfortable we could look everyone in the eye and say we can construct it.
Are there any follow-up to that question? Is there anything in addition that we didn't answer or that you thought of? Okay.
Other questions either online or in the room? We can still answer more questions and still get out early. Oh, no, we can't. Sorry about that. Slightly early. Anything else? Going once. Oh, bell went off. All right. Well, then to wrap up, I want to thank all the team from FSEC who, people were here before noon setting things up and making sure everything was all ready. We have folks who've been listening in online and helping out both from our agency and from other state agencies. Of course, we had folks from Oregon who were also here to make sure that this is all being done seamlessly. To the team from Cascade Renewable, and there's other folks in the room. Super, most of all, thanks to folks from the public and from local governments and from environmental groups and other stakeholders. So thank you so much for being here and being part of this. The questions were the best part of the whole thing. I kind of like to end with a little round of applause for each other for So thank you all for that, and yeah, we'll declare the official ending of this public information meeting. And thank you all for being here. And we're going to be around for more questions. So if you have anything else you want to do, but again, thank you so much.